All right. Okay, well, let's stand 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, it's probably close to capacity, right, from where we're signed up. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, first, thank you guys for taking the lunch hour here, whether your motivation was to learn how to be a consultant or to just have lunch or just hang out with me while you eat lunch. Either way, I appreciate your time, so hopefully we can, share some insight about what is, a topic that's really, more art than science when it comes down to it. There really isn't like a magic bullet per se on, aha, now I'm a consultant, right, if I do these 4 things. So what I focused on was just kind of thinking through, all the things that I've done in my 15 years now that I've done this, and, what were sort of the traits, the skills, the things that have been most valuable to me, right, in, being able to have like a successful client relationship, right? So I think if you had to sort of boil down, being a consultant to one thing, it really is the level of success that you have in dealing with your customers, on a day-to-day basis, okay? So what we'll, structure this today, I'll point out those key traits, what I think are like the 3 or 4 big things that are, really, key to what a consultant should convey or should express. Steps on how to build those traits, right? So you've got some takeaways, and then key next steps. What can you do today, to help with one or all of those, traits? So hopefully there's some actual, concrete next steps you can walk out into those. Okay. So if I had to boil down, what does it mean to be a consultant, right? I think it's 3 things. I think one is the ability to convey expertise, right? If you're consulting on something that, is obviously on a specific topic or a set of topics or some domain, something where you are actually very good because fundamentally, right, somebody is paying you to provide advice on a particular topic, function, something to that effect. So whether it is, business analysis, it could be architecture, it is, testing, it is a particular business domain, like, a functional expert. Or it's the redheaded stepchild of CRM, right? Any of those things are, expertise, and so that's one major function of a consultant is to have and demonstrate some kind of level of expertise in something. But a second very related piece is credibility, okay? So now you're an expert, right? But you also have to be able to convey that expertise in a way that clients believe you, right? So I've seen lots of people where, they can be like technical resources or functional resources where, they are very good, they're very knowledgeable, they are, by the textbook definition, an expert in their field, right? But some aspect of, be it their personality or their, demeanor or their approach in dealing with customers and things like that, they sort of create a roadblock in their ability to convey that they are a credible source of information, right? So credibility is a second big piece of really being a consultant, right? I don't know, how many of you have heard the term trusted advisor? Has that been, heard that in pieces of parts? Yeah. So that's been a common thing that's been batted around again for like 14, 15 years in the consulting industry. The concept of a trusted advisor is someone that, a customer calls to say, I got a problem, can you help me solve this, right? I like to use Randy as a good example, right? Randy is very much a trusted advisor around town for, things like at Caymas and, like at, Calpers where, he'd be there for the rest of his life if they wanted to, right? That kind of credibility, right, is something that, he's earned over the years in, working with people, again, demonstrating expertise, being reliable, all these things which we'll talk about, right? But that credibility is the key to a good client relationship. And, a recurring client relationship, right? And in a consulting business, that's key, right? It's always having those returning customers, okay? The third is communication. So you can be an expert and you can be credible, but how do you, again, convey those things? Well, it comes down to your ability to communicate those ideas, right? And so here again, that's also a place that's, a challenge and requires a different set of skills, both verbally and written communication, right? So I work with lots of people that are excellent presenters, excellent orators, they're great in a meeting, right? But, they can't write something down to save their lives, right? And so when it comes to being able to document something or being able to convey a statement of work or a scope statement or a deliverable, right, they can struggle. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen folks that are great with, written communication, right, where they can, convey an idea clearly and concisely, but you put them in front of a, meeting like this or a presentation or something, and they just aren't as effective, right? And that's also true, like, in a smaller scale, jazz sessions, training sessions, UAT, all of those types of interactions that we have with our customers. I mean, those are all opportunities to communicate with our customers. UAT and training is a great example, right? Where, you're standing there facilitating a training session, you've got, a user raising their hand saying, how do I log in, right? And so at that point, you have to convey expertise, right? Here's how you log in, right? Express that you're, credible so that you're doing it in a way that does not, demean or undermine, they're able to move through, right? And you're doing it in a way that's communicating it effectively, right? So, I mean, that's a great example of, where, being a consultant really helps is in that interaction with clients, right? Okay. So, any questions or thoughts on the basic traits at this point? So, anybody disagree? Any other, thoughts that you want to put on there that you think otherwise? Okay. All right. So let's start diving into each one of these. So let's talk first about becoming an expert. Well, how do you do that? Big surprise, get some experience, right? That took me all day to come up with. Yeah, I mean, there's really just no way around it. You can, especially in IT, right? There's lots of academic resources to build skills, right? There's training, there is, written materials, there's, demos, products, all kinds of things that you can do. At the end of the day, there is no replacement for experience, right? So, you've heard Steve in many meetings past talk about why it's important for us to grow and diversify our opportunities, because it gets people experience in different things. That's absolutely true. That's how you build expertise, is, doing this type of work, over and over again in multiple places. You get different experiences, you get different type of knowledge, and you get the chance to apply that knowledge, right? So all of those things are important. So while I think, so this gets to kind of an interesting thought, because while a lot of people, it's important to have certifications, it's important to have, that type of training, right? Those things are good, but they are not a substitute for that, real life, real experience, right? So here again, I can go back to my personal experiences where, let's say I'm looking at a resume, for example, right? And looking at, I'll just say business analyst, not picking on business analysts or anything like that, but this is a relevant example. I look and see, what their overall experience is, and then I also look to see, okay, how much time and effort have they spent on writing down skills and certifications, right? Plenty of resumes where pages and pages and pages of skills and certs and Lean Six Sigma certified and, TOGAF and the business, analysis framework, right? But then I need to look at their experience and say, okay, what did you actually do, right? So, because all of that academic training, right, is not necessarily an equal substitute for that, breadth and depth of experience, right? It needs a balance, but you definitely need that. So I don't want to de-emphasize the importance of training and certification. It's a good component to building your expertise, but it is not the only one, right? So getting experience is definitely key to doing that, right? And yeah, it takes time, right? I came in, as an analyst, starting at Deloitte, and they're like, okay, you are now a IT consultant, and I'm like, okay, I'm an IT consultant. Then I actually hit the ground on projects. But yeah, I mean, the reality of it is, right, coming out of school, yeah, I understood methods and, smart and learn stuff, but yeah, I did not have experience to apply. It took me a couple of years, right, to actually build up to have some kind of, meaningful experience, and you just kind of build on that as years go. So now here's the second piece of that, applied knowledge, right? So let's say you spend, you know, X number of years doing business analysis or QA or doing, you know, architecture, right? It's not necessarily enough to be able to say, okay, I did exactly, you know, this thing over here, I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here. Every project's a little different, every customer's a little different, you know, every personality is a little bit different. So the second piece to you know, applying expertise is being able to take what you know, mold it, modify it, and tailor it to the unique situation at hand, right? Sometimes that can be as simple as, you know, using their own template. I mean, it can be that mundane sometimes, right? But other times it can be taking a methodology that we have, like, you know, Agile, for example. You know, I've done, whatever, 5 Agile projects, and they've all been exactly the same, but now here's a client that hasn't really done Agile before, not really ready to do it, they're still stuck in waterfall. So why don't we, you know, scale back on that a little bit? Let's just, you know, focus on doing, you know, the actual build effort in sprints, but we're not going to push them into, you know, user stories and full-on product, you know, numbers and all those things if they're just not ready, right? That's how you can kind of tailor expertise in order to, you know, just better serve that particular customer. Okay, so does that make sense? That concept of you know, applying knowledge. So yeah, get experience, but then apply it, you know, in a way that's judicious.
One thing I wanted to share about the experience, and when Sean was talking about the certifications versus actual experience in the projects, we're seeing more and more of a push in proposals that business analyst activities, like if you were to list out on your resume for Catman, is not enough. They want, you know, have done use cases, have tracked TD and as-is, have done jazz, have done, you know, sit-downs with UAT and stuff like that. They're very specific. So they're wanting to know the full scale of what you're doing, not just generic, you know, development efforts or analyst efforts. And it's getting more and more that way as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point on this is to sort of like, you know, as you kind of gain experience, it helps to sort of itemize what you know from a skill standpoint, right? Because that can come in handy, particularly, you know, not just on your resume, right, but also in being able to better apply your knowledge by componentizing it a little bit, easier to apply. Good point. Okay, so credibility. That's the next piece of this. How do you, you know, how do you gain credibility? So you got all this expertise, you know, and you know it, but how do you make your customers, right? So one of the most effective ways to do that is to share your knowledge, right? So we talk a lot about, you know, knowledge transfer. You've heard that term all over the place, right? The state uses it all the time. There are many, you know, political and you know, personality-related reasons for why knowledge transfer has varying degrees of effectiveness, right? But the number one kind of you know, fundamental principle still remains is being able to share your knowledge either in a formal or informal setting, right, is a great way to establish that credibility, right? So give you a you know, good example. I was in a meeting with CHA, and this was, you know, 6 months ago, right? And you know, we're just talking about statuses and next steps and all those things, right? And then we started talking about this upgrade to CRM 2016. They're on the one version older. And so it was kind of a discussion where they didn't really know what they were expecting or what they were, you know, thinking about in that respect. But then I said, okay, there's 3 things you got to think about. One is the technical work involved in actually doing the upgrade, you know, refactoring code, things like that. The second is you have to consider the work to redo your sitemap, because when you go from the older version to the new version, the navigation changes a little bit. And then the third thing is then you have to consider retraining your users because of the sitemap change. That, you know, you have to do basically like a where's my stuff training, right? So I lay that framework out for them in, you know, literally about a 2-minute conversation, right? But then that's what the sysadmin has then since used to be able to justify why they shouldn't take that on now and instead focus on that as a future phase, right? Which is important to us because that helps justify, you know, our presence later on down the line in helping them with this separate chunk of work, right? But had we not been able to express that at that time, right, it might have, you know, jumbled the scope of the project quite a bit more, taken on something they didn't really know about, and, you know, just kind of generally create a mess, right? So that was, again, taking expertise that I knew, applying it, right, but then expressing it in a way that demonstrated some credibility, and we got a positive outcome as a result of that, right? The other way that you establish credibility, and this is true in anything, right, is follow through on commitments, right? So So plenty of folks I know, really good at what they do, and they're like, yep, we can agree to do this, and then what happens, right? They don't follow through. So, part of the reason why folks like Randy, for example, are, trusted advisors throughout town is because for 25 years, right, he has always been a reliable go-to guy for, we got a problem, we need to solve it, and he would solve it, right, which is why he was, so well established over at Calvert. So, it's as simple as if you, make a commitment to do something, make sure that you follow through on it, right? That kind of follow-through, that sort of reliability, is also a great way to establish credibility on an ongoing basis. If clients know that they can trust you to do something that you say they're going to do that they need done, that goes a long way, right, to building that trust. Okay. And then the other one here is this other statement I like, is remember who the star is, right? So ironically, right, being an expert, demonstrating credibility, right, it becomes very easy to be overly prominent, right, if that makes sense. Especially in the state, especially in the public sector, right, you've always got to step a little bit lightly when it comes to, again, the politics and personalities involved and things like that. So, this statement here, out for glory, just not our own, this is part of a marketing slogan that Deloitte used about 15 years ago. One of them was this, which is out for glory, just not our own, right? And actually, it stuck with me. It actually is a pretty good tagline where it's wanting to be as successful as possible, right? But sort of then taking a step back and letting, the customer, shine, right? So, our role is not necessarily to feed our own egos or, to make us look successful, it's to make the client look successful. And a rather delicate balancing act of making sure that, it is the customer's glory that is won out, but and making sure that also that customer recognizes us too, and that's a much more delicate, balancing act, which gets much more into where, again, that more art of like the business development cycle and things like that. But certainly, as folks that are responsible for delivery and being on the ground on a day-to-day basis, right, it's important to remember that the star of the show, right, are our customers, right, and that helps with credibility. Not only do you know what you're doing, not only are you reliable and will get it done, but you're not going to step on anybody's toes while doing it, right? All those things, put together, just being savvy enough to understand, who the star is a big step toward establishing and maintaining credibility. They trust you for all of those levels, right? Okay. Any questions at this point? No? Okay. Clear as mud, right? Okay, so communicating effectively. Yeah, all this in one slide, right? Sure. Again, it's all about knowing your stuff, but you have to be able to express it in a way that makes sense, right? And again, you could have a whole separate set of lunch and learn sessions on forms, styles, types, and best practices for communication, right? I mean, it's a never-ending process. To this day, I'm still learning better, more refined ways about how to communicate messages, both verbally, and in a written form, right? But just to circle back to what we talked about a little bit in, demonstrating expertise, there's lots of forms to do that, especially on the delivery path, right? Presentations, jazz sessions, meetings, status meetings, training sessions, UAT sessions, right? All of those are opportunities to practice verbal communication, right? And verbal communication is obviously extremely important for a number of reasons. One, you obviously have to be able to convey what you're talking about, right? So being able to, accurately express facts about what's going on and why is all, very helpful. But stylistically, right, this is where it becomes more art than science, right? It's being able to, communicate in a way that's not only effective, but is not, confrontational, right? Is not, demeaning or condescending or anything like that. And that can be difficult, right? Unfortunately, that has happened, where not intentional by any means, right? But it just, it kind of happens. And that, again, comes with experience, right? I know certainly like in status meetings, like in executive meetings and things like that, it comes down to really knowing your audience, right? So for example, if I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of technical guys, right, we'll talk, nuts and bolts about, specific issues, architectural impacts, things like that. I won't have that same conversation in an exec meeting, right, with a deputy director. I'm going to talk about business, I'm going to talk about high-level impacts, right? So knowing your audience and understanding what their pain points are and what their interests are, let that be your your guide for what you communicate, right? Is what are they most interested in, what are they most focused on, tailor the message around that. So you could be conveying the same fact, right? You know, the project is late, right? But how you communicate that fact and to which audience is a big difference. The project is late, so we're cool on the architecture side, just have to remember that the servers, you know, the test servers need to be up one more month, right? That's a discussion for IT. Project is late, you know, here's the mitigation plan. That's the message for the execs, right? Project is late, okay, here's all the things that we have to do from a scope and functional change standpoint to get things back on schedule. That's for, you know, the client project manager and the project team, right? Same fact, three completely different conversations, right? So one of the things that develops, you know, a skill over time, and again, tied to expertise and credibility, right, is expressing those messages. But building on top of those other two skills, you'll learn how to tailor those messages effectively, okay? So, what's related? Written communication. Emails. Oh my God. Emails. Where do we start? A lot of organizations, it's actually gotten better with you know, the advent of, you know, IMing and text and things like that, but there was a time when everything was communicated through email, right, and it was painful. To this day, though, especially in public sector, you know, email communication is still very much like a de facto, you said this in writing type of a thing, right? So emails, I would argue, are as important, if not more important, than a lot of verbal communications, right? Because you have to remember those are a written, you know, record of what transpired. And how many people got into flame wars, right, over email? It's hard. If the answer is nobody, great. But it's happened to me before, you know, back in my Calvin days, and it's extremely difficult to A, get out of those, or B, for anybody to win, right? So written communication, you know, again, with emails is just as important as, you know, verbal or any formal deliverables or anything like that. What's being written, you know, is going to be read, so you have to make sure that it conveys the right message, right? So there is a whole separate, you know, art and science to learning how to, you know, effectively write business, you know, business communication documents, right? But if nothing else, take away from this that when you write emails, consider those to be, you know, just as formal as a deliverable or something that you're going to put in front of an exec, because you don't know who that's going to get forwarded to, right? Rolling it up a level, right? It's, you know, in a consultant role, you have to remember, you know, when you're dealing with a client, whether it's through email, in person, on-site, or anything like that, you're always on, right? That's an important takeaway. Unfortunately, there's rarely a time where you can kind of, you know, just lay back and coast, if you will, right? You've always got to be cognizant of what you're saying, what you're writing, and whom you're writing, right? In public or private sector, it doesn't matter. It's just good practice and good form, right, to be able to know that what you're putting out there, you know, is potentially going to be read by, you know, other folks, right? So, so anyway, that's, you know, of these other ones, the status report, specs, proposals, things like that, you know, that's kind of a given, especially for formal deliverables. They go through a review cycle and all those things, right? Proposals, though, you know, I do want to point out again, because that's always a personal sticking point of mine, right, is that writing for a proposal is definitely a different skill, right? And I would argue it's a very important skill for a consultant to learn how to do. And here's why. So with a proposal, you know, it's usually something like, okay, describe to me how your solution is going to do X, right? So it's a very open-ended thing, and it's not easy to do, right? You know, a lot of people are like, oh, what do I write? I don't know. But you have to, again, part of it is applying your expertise to say, well, this kind of sounds like something we did 5 years ago, so, you know, maybe that's what this, you know, maybe that's what this is. So, you know, you're right to that. The key, though, which is, you know, for writing an effective proposal, but also for being an effective, you know, business communicator, is explaining how and why that particular thing, that approach, that function, whatever you're writing about, how and why does that benefit the customer? So that's the tricky part. That again is takes time to learn and you know, kind of ingrain into it. But once you learn to do that consistently, proposal writing, statements of work, you know, unsolicited proposals, you know, anything where you're trying to persuade the customer, right, or persuade somebody into a certain course of action, being able to articulate, why it's beneficial for them is key, right? So hard to do, but something I would encourage everybody to think about, particularly with respect to any of these, if you're working on a proposal, that's a big thing there. If you're working on something even dealing with your customers, right, where you're saying, I think we should take this different course of action, right? Taking the time to explain why should the client, give a what about that direction. If you can articulate and explain that, that's your key to influencing the decision, right? Also, a key part of being a consultant is being able to influence decisions, right? That's the fourth trait.
Intangible work.
Yeah. Well, again, those having these other kind of three base traits and skills, if you will, put them all together and use them effectively, the outcome is better ability to influence decision making, right? And that's ultimately what a what a good consultant can do. Okay. All right. So any other questions on kind of those three key things? Anything on communication in general? You could spend days on this topic, but all right. So a couple of key actions, next steps, things you can concentrate on today, right, and take back with your to your project and then start working on. So number one, always know your audience. Okay, one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got when I first started, and to this day persists, is know your audience, right? Whether you're writing, whether you're speaking, whatever it is, right? Understand who it is that you're talking to, because you will tailor your message, right? You will tailor the detail, not the facts necessarily, but you will be tailoring the message specifically to your audience, right? So you're conveying a certain level of expertise, you're communicating it in an effective way, and you're establishing credibility, right, by being a reliable, source of information and delivering it to them in a way that's helpful, right? So that always is helpful. And again, going back to the email thing, you don't always know your audience. That's what makes emails so tricky, right? It's the way that they can be forwarded. So be a good listener, okay? This is hard to do. For me, it's a struggle, right? To this day, I have to work really hard to make sure that I take in all the information, that I'm processing it, that I don't, assume something, just based on what I think I heard. But being a good listener, right, is a key to establishing trust. If the customer feels and understands that they're being heard, that's a huge, plus to, establishing credibility. So at a minimum, being a good listener helps make sure that you get the facts straight, right? That you understand the situation, you understand the request, you understand the specification, whatever it is, right? But then, making sure that, you're not talking over clients, you're not sort of, again, displaying any sort of condescension, any sort of demeaning, personality, anything like that. Those are the things that clients respond negatively to. Okay.
I would ask that, just a good listener. I think it's like, what's a good listener? And I think the authenticity. I think we've talked about that in other, lunch and learns or some other classes with leadership and things like that. It's that you convey that you're really being authentic and just hearing what they're saying. And that's your.
One thing that's worked well for me is I'll actually just repeat back to them, right? But what I think I heard was, this, and this. And, if I'm wrong, fine, they'll correct it. But if you're right, and hopefully you are, you instantly boost your credibility, because it's like, they understood, right? That's a big deal. So that art of, listening and then verifying that you heard them correctly, right? That's a simple, straightforward step, but again, it helps tremendously.
And related to the next one, ask tough questions. If you're a good listener, then you can ask good questions.
Exactly, yes. So this is another thing that probably might step you out of your comfort zone a little bit, but is something that you can absolutely do today, is don't be afraid to, ask those tough questions, right? That's, again, another hallmark of a consultant is, being able to not even so much challenge them, but just ask questions that they normally wouldn't think about or aren't comfortable considering, right? Because that, again, ties to, based on my expertise, I understand there's potentially an issue here. I want to have a conversation about, how could we deal with this, right? Let me hear your point of view, and let me come up with a conclusion based on that, right? So again, kind of taking those three traits and applying them, but doing so in a way that boosts, all of those traits, right? And again, establishes you as a trusted advisor.
Sometimes asking tough questions is harder.
It can be, yeah. Depends how you ask.
If you don't know who are you asking, so then they will go website and talk about it.
Correct, yeah. So,
It's a practical.
yeah.
I have experience in many cases.
That's a good point, yeah. And sometimes you do need to provide context, right? So I think that's another good thing, going back to the communication angle, is whether you're asking a question or whether you're conveying a point, providing context and explaining why, that also helps a lot. Right. Yeah, I mean, that was there used to be someone who still remained nameless used to like to send lots and lots of emails with no context, right? And it's just like, well, huh? What? Why? What am I supposed to do with it?
Especially state users, they are very picky and they are very sensitive. If you ask something which goes beyond their comfort zone, they will create trouble. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, yes, you're right. The part two of this session, right, which hasn't been written yet, but is how to convey or how to frame a difficult question in a way that is not necessarily confrontational, right? Because again, there are ways to do that, but it's right. That also is another separate skill in and of itself, right? Because it is very easy for a hard question to become immediately challenging, right? When you don't intend it to be.
That's a skill.
Last thing here, okay, so always provide options. So this goes back to customer service training that I had back in college when I was doing campus tech support. Right? And what it comes down to is, again, is in the course of an interaction, and again, going back to the expertise and credibility aspect, right? You're sitting there saying, I got this problem, and you say, well, okay, there's 3 ways that you can deal with this, right? In doing that, you are, communicating effectively, you are demonstrating your expertise, and you're establishing credibility because you're giving them multiple ways to move forward. The one thing I've learned that's actually counterintuitive, but this does seem to work, right, is a bad option is better than no option at all, right? So, yeah, so if you, even if you have a conversation to say that, well, one option is we just, stop everything, right? The other is, we do X, the other is we do Y. Well, you've at least provided multiple paths forward. Sometimes, and here's the other trick to this, a bad option is also a great way to drive the decision-making to something else, right? It's all about perception, right? Perception is reality. So don't ever be, afraid to eliminate a bad option because you know it's bad. Sometimes that can be a nice little chit that you can use to frame the discussion in a way that moves them more toward where you think is the best way to go, right? So if you have the choice between saying, here's the best way to go, versus here's 3 options, for which way we could go, right? Okay, there's a risk that they may not pick the best option, right? They could pick the bad option, but at least if you properly articulated the risks and consequences of doing so, you've at least armed them with all of the information, and again, you remain a credible source, and you've influenced the decision, right? So that was something I learned. And so again, taking a real life example, it was somebody comes up and it's like, I've lost my midterm paper, my disk is corrupted. It's like, well, what you could do is, I can run through the repair utility, right? And if that doesn't work, then we can, try some other recovery thing that I had. And then, well, if that doesn't work, then yeah, you'll have to, actually, you can find like, a portion of it that was saved on the hard drive, but that's, about as far as you can get. So obviously, one of those was far from optimal, but at least it was way better than saying, nope, you're screwed. Right?
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing you don't want to say is there's nothing you can do, right? There's always a way to convey options, even if they're not so great options, but again, it expresses a degree of confidence, expertise, and credibility, and that you're providing some kind of path forward. Okay?